It was supposed to be the holiday of a lifetime. A glorious honeymoon in paradise for a golden couple. She a beauty queen, and he a sports star. Until a brutal murder brought an abrupt end to their cherished dreams. I'm Donald McIntyre, and this is my investigation into one of the most distressing, tragic and memorable murders of recent years. I'm an investigative reporter and a criminologist, and I've joined forces with cold case specialist Nicola Tallant, and I've also drafted in some of the world's leading experts to try and build a picture of what happened on the day Michaela McAreavey was violently strangled.
Anyone in this particular case will start to think, well, what evidence did I leave in that particular room on Michaela's body? What evidence might tie me in to this crime?
Preservation of the scene is the most important bit, so you want your cordons there, you want to control access in and out.
Okay, yes, it's a little bit Big Brother, but at the end of the day, it is our job to protect the guests. Their safety is our priority.
Each day they think of that beautiful girl with that beautiful radiant smile that meant so much to so many people.
We talked to people on the ground, many of whom have never been talked to by the police investigating the case, despite the investigation being more than 2.5 years old. And we uncover new clues, present damning evidence about the police failings in the investigation, and we reveal dramatic new evidence linking one chief suspect to the crime scene in a way that has never been reported so far. Michaela McAreavey was found brutally strangled in her hotel room just days into her stay at the Legends Hotel, a luxury resort on the northern coast of Mauritius. It was a magnet for the rich and famous, and for loved-up newlyweds. That was until this terrible murder. The primary school teacher was strangled in a crime which has tarnished the reputation of the tourist destination. It has left Ireland north and south grieving for the bride who came back from her honeymoon in a coffin. The death sparked a frenzy of media activity, and the top Mauritian murder cops were put on the case as the reputation of the island and its precious tourism industry remained in jeopardy. The major crime investigation team were quick to move in on a number of suspects, all hotel workers. But the speed of their investigation raised eyebrows abroad. Had they got the right men? A trial amid allegations of police brutality collapsed as the men were declared innocent. Now, no one has been held accountable for the death of Michaela, and the killer or killers remain at large. The story started very much where it ended here in St. Malachy's Church, Ballymacilroy, County Tyrone. The couple were married in a joyous ceremony in December 2010, and a little over 3.5 weeks later, John McAreavey brought his new bride, his new wife home here to be buried. She was warm, pretty and friendly, and came with an impeccable pedigree as the daughter of one of the country's greatest Gaelic football coaches, Michaela Harte. What had happened to cause Michaela's death? What were the circumstances leading up to her brutal murder? I have travelled from her church here in Ireland, where she was married and then buried, all the way to Mauritius with my cold case team to try and uncover the truth behind murder in paradise. It's a tragedy which is still unfolding, more than 2.5 years after the violent honeymoon murder. Every police mistake and every failed prosecution means another day for the family without answers and without closure. As yet, there are no answers, convictions, or any comfort for the family. The countdown to murder never gave a hint of what was to come. The couple set off on a 3-week honeymoon, travelling to Dubai and a 5-star hotel for 9 days before embarking on their most eagerly anticipated part of their special holiday, a 2-week stay at this resort. The previous evening, the couple dined at this restaurant and enjoyed the balmy coastal winds before retiring to their room in this block of 5-star luxury honeymoon suites. The couple had lunch at the Banyan poolside restaurant when Michaela left the table to get biscuits. She walked just 150 steps to her room and placed her key card in the lock and entered at 2:44 p.m. Her husband, meanwhile, ordered tea and waited. It soon became clear that Michaela was taking too long, so we followed her to the room and tried to gain access. He himself had left his own keycard in the room earlier, so he ventured off to reception to get someone to let him into the honeymoon suite. He walked about 5 minutes to reception, where a bellboy joined him to open the room. A half an hour after he last saw his wife walk away happily, he suddenly saw her corpse floating in a bath with the tap still flowing. She was beyond saving, but he still tried CPR in vain. Michaela McAreavey was pronounced dead within the hour, and the dreams of the golden couple were over. The distraught husband was initially taken down to the police station and held for hours under suspicion. This in itself is standard in such investigations. Most murders are committed by people that are close to the victims. What was not normal was the cruel teasing that John McAreavey suffered while in the police station.
Obviously, he was treated as a suspect, which was probably quite right in the beginning, to some extent, but when he was taken down to the police station, he was put in a room on his own. They were jeering him that, don't know what's wrong with you, you'll get another wife soon, and awful treatment, really.
It was only the intervention of Brice Leno, the manager of the hotel, who was able to explain to the police that a stolen master key card had been used just minutes prior to Michaela entering the room. The distraught husband was released. It was clear from then that it was an inside job. Our cold case team believe that the murder took place in the following manner. A hotel insider, we think perhaps a security officer who had access to keys, entered the premises, entered this room at 2:42 p.m. on one Monday afternoon in January. 2 minutes later, Michaela entered the room. We believe that as Michaela entered the room, the thief was already in the bathroom alcove, a little mezzanine, just slightly raised above the bedroom section. We believe that as Michaela entered the room, the thief was here and considered his options. If the thief was a cleaner, he or she simply would have said, "Oh, I'm cleaning the room," and nothing would have been said. It's a normal hotel situation. Perhaps, though, he was in a security uniform, which the police, we understand, now believe, and he felt that his presence could not be explained away. So he hid in the bathroom, in the toilet, hoping that Michaela would go in and leave very quickly and he'd be able to escape. That didn't happen. Now Michaela came in. She decided she would use the toilet, go into the toilet for whatever reason. The killer was startled. Michaela started to run. The thief panicked. He grabbed her from behind and held her tight until all life evaporated from her. He didn't have a weapon to hand. What was he to do? He could have run. He chose to take the most desperate of actions and kill Michaela. As soon as he realized that Michaela was dead, he placed her body curiously in the bathtub. He probably did it to create an alternative reason as to why Michaela was murdered or Michaela had died, perhaps drowning. Obviously, that didn't make sense, but to him in a panic, it may have done. We know that at 3:05, and the killer may still have been in the room, that John McAreavey had signed for his bar bill and had tried to case the room to gain access to see where Michaela was. No sign of her. He decided to go to reception. At 3:26, he entered the room with the assistance of a bellboy. Tragically, he discovered the body of Michaela in the bathtub. Professor David Wilson, a crime profiler and one of the world's leading criminologists, believes that the very nature of the crime tells us a lot about the killing and how it happened.
If I was profiling this crime on the day that it happened, I would be saying it was a man who did this. Most murders are committed by men. It was somebody who was able to gain access to a locked room and therefore was probably employed by the hotel. I would say the fact that the perpetrator strangled from behind implied that this wasn't interpersonal, this had no sexual element to it. And I would be saying that because it had no sexual element to it, and there were other aspects in relation to placing Michaela's body in the bath, that this wasn't planned. This is somebody who was panicking. This is somebody who was disorganized. This is somebody, therefore, who left quite a bit of evidence in the room itself that the police should have been able to harness very quickly in bringing the correct suspect to justice.
But despite the abundance of evidence, the police have not secured any convictions. There's plenty of blame going around in the absence of a conviction. The foreign press are blaming the police, and the McAreavey family are blaming the hotel for allowing a possible theft ring to operate in the hotel, ultimately, they say, costing Michaela her life. Hotel security expert and former Metropolitan Police officer Roger Blake believes that the hotel has to share some of the blame for the terrible events.
First of all, you have to look very closely at the checks on the staff that you hire, to look at their backgrounds. If you are putting people in a position of responsibility, they have to not be open to temptation. So taking someone from a very, very poor background and then putting them in a position where they have access to massive wealth, to the temptation of thinking, oh dear, they won't miss that, they've got so much. That's your job as a manager, is to pick and interview your staff, to train your staff, to bring in the ethics of the position that they are in. But it's also your job never to trust anyone.
Coming up, the secrets behind the killer's strange corpse cleaning ritual and new revelations about police bungling and failures in the investigation. Now, 2.5 years on, the police appear no closer to solving the case. So I've put together a cold case team to try and uncover the secrets behind this murder in paradise. With cold case investigator Nicola Tallant and criminologist Professor David Wilson, we return to the murder scene to re-examine the case from top to bottom. On the 10th of January 2011, after 3 p.m. in the afternoon, Michaela McAreavey was found strangled to death after stumbling upon a hotel employee stealing her belongings. Her limp body was found by her distraught husband in the bathtub, put there by her killer in a bizarre, unexplained ritual. Leading crime profiler Professor David Wilson tries to understand why a panic thief who killed in a moment of madness would place the corpse in a bath with running water.
A crime that started out as a robbery and eventually ends up as a murder. He's surprised, he's taken unawares, he is panicking, and therefore he's not thinking clearly, he's thinking in the moment, and therefore he has to find some way then of disposing with a body. He can't literally dig a grave and place Michaela in the grave. He can't transport her body to another part of the island because he would be seen, he would be captured on CCTV. Therefore, he's got to find some way of disposing of her body and make that disposal, as best as he can, panicking, look as if the death might have occurred through natural consequences. So there might be a sense in which he thought, I'll place her in the bath and people might think that she simply slipped into the bath, she may have drowned or so forth. The second instrumental reason is by placing her body in the bath, you also destroy a significant amount of forensic evidence. The classic phrase that one would use in these kinds of scenes is that every contact leaves a trace. Well, if you put the body in the bath, you are literally washing away the contact between the perpetrator and the victim.
The critical murder clue centered on the key card used to enter room 1025, now renumbered 1026, in the aftermath of the homicide. Whoever used the master key card to enter Michaela's room 2.5 minutes before she did is almost certainly her killer. But the mechanics of these locks we've discovered can give false timings. It seems that each of the hotel's 240 room locks has its own clock and sends individual timings to the hotel security system. The locks are only synced up once every few months, meaning that the accuracy of the door entries cannot be accurately confirmed. We know the killer used a stolen master key card that was kept in the hotel security office, and that points to an inside job. Brice Leno, the hotel manager, would not give us an interview, but he did confirm the security flaw to us in a private briefing.
a reading for a couple of doors down within, like at exactly the same time, I think, as Michaela was supposed to have put her key card in, which was 2:44, about 2 or 3 doors down. Somebody else put the key card in at exactly 2:44 as well, and yet that witness doesn't seem to have been interviewed or identified.
Roger Blake, a security hotel expert and former police officer, believes that this is a critical failing.
To have a modern system that is out of sync, the locks individually out of sync with each other, how can you prove who went in at what time? How can you prove who is guilty, who is innocent? How can you break or make an alibi if you cannot trust the lock reads? It protects you, it protects the guests, it protects the innocent, and it convicts the guilty.
Despite the fact that the timings are not accurate, it is still clear that there was a stolen master keycard used to enter room 1025 just minutes before Michaela was murdered. This single fact excludes husband John McAreavey as a suspect. An autopsy would reveal that Michaela was strangled from behind, which would suggest that the murderer did not know her.
Strangulation is a very sexual form of murder, and usually an experienced killer will want to see the victim face to face as the victim dies, and there are a number of reasons why he would gain sexual pleasure from that fact. He is literally watching the life of another person drain in front of his eyes.
Having dispensed with John McAreavey as a suspect, the police were under huge pressure to get a conviction, and they immediately set to work with a confidence that is rare among murder squad detectives elsewhere.
The police investigator, they had arrested and were about to charge the suspect so quickly, without even having done basic checks, like timing checks and stuff like that. And the lead investigator in the case was boasting that they had a 100% conviction rate.
That year, there were 30 murders apart from Michaela's, and each one was solved on the basis of confession evidence. The following year, in 2012, the police also claimed to have solved all the murders, again on the basis of confessions. Professor Wilson recognizes this dynamic.
Of course, the police had a particular mindset almost immediately they entered the crime scene. They were going to solve this case, but they were going to solve this case not on the application of good forensic science, not through the application of good detective techniques, but they were going to try and solve this case on what I can only describe as gut instinct. And there is a place for gut instinct in detective work, but it's not the only club in the golf bag of techniques that should be used in a case like this.
Unfortunately, that is exactly what the local police did. They arrested 4 and got 2 to confess and incriminate 2 others in the murder. The police believed that there was a robbery ring at play in the hotel. They quickly signed, sealed and delivered their case, expecting to win their jury convictions as they normally did. However, the international scrutiny meant that all did not go according to plan. The speed of the investigation raised eyebrows immediately abroad. Had they got the right men? Could they be trusted to do a proper investigation? And would the case stand up in court? Allegations of police brutality and forced confessions abounded, and many believed that the police were rushing to conviction in order to protect the Mauritian tourist industry. Days after Michaela was killed, Sandeep Mania and Avanish Trebahoon were charged with her murder and Raj Decoy with conspiracy to murder. A week later, Dasan Narayanan, later to become a key figure in the case, was also charged with aiding and abetting the robbery.
Essentially, the prosecution case was that 2 hotel workers had murdered Michaela and were seen leaving the room by another hotel worker who they later threatened to keep quiet.
It was the police case that they were part of a robbery ring, including the 2 turned witnesses who were to give evidence against the murder suspects.
But the problem was that Sandeep Mania, who was a trusted employee and had been in the hotel for 7 years, who was actually charged with the murder, he was actually in a completely different part of the resort at the time. From the limited CCTV that was available, he was seen on that, and he also had a cast iron alibi because he was on the phone to his sister in the UK at the time of the murder.
The court case that followed in July 2012 confirmed suspicions that the Mauritian police had carried out a bungled investigation. The two suspects were acquitted, and it became painfully clear that the police had got the wrong men. There was international outrage. We caught up with Sandeep Mania, who is now suing the Mauritian police for false arrest and imprisonment.
It was horrible. I can't believe things like this can happen to me. Because it was a normal day. I left my home, I went to work, and then in the afternoon I'm in jail.
And in the court, did you think, when did you think the jury were beginning to believe your story?
I don't know, because from the very first day I say I was innocent. I don't know how all this happened. No, really, I don't know.
Defense lawyers were scathing about the police actions and the failed prosecution case.
From start till the end, there have been serious shortcomings. We told the jury that there were catastrophic failures of the police.
Eventually, the innocent men were released, but the killer was still at liberty. The Mauritian government moved quickly, and a number of lead investigators left the police force while a new inquiry was launched within a month. And this time, the Mauritian authorities vowed that they would carry out a full and proper investigation. It was an inside job, but the very nature of a hotel means that it should have been easy to isolate the key suspects.
A hotel is very much like a small country. We control our borders. We control people that walk through the door, be it the front door for guests or the back door for staff. So every member of staff that comes in, they're checked. We check passports. We have the same passport checking system that the immigration people have.
It is likely that Michaela interrupted a thief or thieves in her room and met her end in a catastrophe born out of panic and poverty.
Poverty itself will breed crime, especially if you're somewhere like Mauritius or one of these lovely islands which will attract people with money. You have this greater gap between those haves and those have-nots. So consequently there will always be some jealousy, there will always be something, oh, they won't miss it, they have so much.
Although one set of hotel workers have been exonerated, it should have been easy to isolate those who could have had access to the security key. Find the person who had that key card and you have the killer. But at the time of the murder, it is clear that the procedures for master key card access was not sufficient to protect guests.
If there is a communal key that can be used by several people, you have to protect those keys. There has to be accountability.
It didn't happen that way here, and someone used the master key card to commit murder. Coming up, we reveal the witnesses that the police have never spoken to, and we pinpoint the major security flaws that could expand the group of likely suspects from the tens into the hundreds. Mystery surrounds the death of Michaela McAreavey while on honeymoon, and the murder remains unsolved despite a near-perfect crime scene. Her husband discovered her dead body after she was brutally strangled. A bungled police investigation resulted in the acquittal of two men who had robust alibis. Now a new investigation team is in place, but still years on, her killer or killers remain at large. The evidence, the nature of the crime and its location should have meant that the police could have secured convictions in this crime very quickly.
A hotel resort is almost like a mini island. It's almost like you can control the people who are there, you know who's there or who should be there. Admittedly, people can come and go, but this is relatively easy to solve because there should be CCTV. People will be able to determine where you were at particular times, at particular points in the day. And of course, classically, you would also, in this disorganized crime scene, have quite a lot of forensic evidence that you could use to also identify the perpetrator.
Huge questions remain over the CCTV footage that was collected at the time of the murder, and there are serious concerns that most of the CCTV cameras were targeted on the perimeter of the hotel and not on the hotel grounds proper. Now there is a camera over the murder room, but back in January 2011 there were no cameras on these corridors in and around the crime scene.
So initially the cameras are facing out. You're protecting your perimeter. You're protecting the hotel from outsiders coming in specifically to commit crime. You then site CCTV in strategic points around the hotel. The whole point is to protect our guests at all time. People are very CCTV aware these days, so you sight them visibly because people are aware that it's there, which acts as a deterrent, but it also protects the guests and it keeps the staff in line, so they know they're being watched. OK, yes, it's a little bit Big Brother, but at the end of the day, it is our job to protect the guests. Their safety is our priority.
For the last 2.5 years, a mystery surrounded the footage generated by the 46 cameras placed in and around the resort. The Mauritian police refused to hand over the CCTV material to defence barristers in the failed court case, despite constant requests. What has happened to this crucial evidence, and was there anything sinister in its disappearance? Our cold case team has learned that the police did not hand it over in court, not because they didn't want to, but because they no longer had it. We have discovered that 90% of the CCTV footage in and around the hotel at the time of the murder has been lost and erased because police officers couldn't work the video machines. It seems that when they were playing it back, they were in fact deleting it.
Because they were asked, did they want to be shown how to do it, and instead of learning, they just pressed record and were, for days and days on end, they were just wiping everything that was there.
I mean, it takes a considerable amount of effort to actually be that incompetent to
Yeah.
destroy all the key material of the CCTV, and that's crucial to exclude people and to include people in the investigation.
The only CCTV evidence that remains is a short compilation put together by hotel staff in the immediate days after the killing. It's clear that the person or persons who entered Michaela's room with the master key card just minutes before she did was responsible for her murder. But who was that? And who are the cast of suspects that the new investigation should target? Alarmingly, our cold case team has witnessed groups of males around the resort and on the patio of the room where Michaela was killed. If these young men could get close to the room, who else could have done so? This here is the property of the resort. But the beach and the grass verges and the volcanic rock there, those outposts, that is public property. And members of the public and hawkers, fishermen, they have full access all the way along the beach, which means that there's no real way of monitoring who can get access to the property, despite the CCTV, despite the control gates, and despite the security officers. It's part of Mauritian law that its beaches are public property. So as much as the tourist resorts want to suggest that their grounds are exclusive, there is in fact open public access. Fishermen and locals regularly skirt the property, and some taunt the paranoid security staff who track the larger groups around. Here we can see a large group of boys going onto the hotel site to swim. There are also the trinket sellers and hawkers who are allowed on site by agreement of the hotel. They work several hours each day but do not undergo the same security checks as ordinary hotel workers here would do.
We have a very good understanding with hotels. The directors are very kind, so they allowed us to work here, no problem.
It's worth noting that none of the hawkers or any of the hotel taxi drivers or indeed members of the public who were walking on the beach on the day that Michaela was murdered were DNA tested or interviewed during the investigation of the case. But all these security concerns would never cross the mind of those guests here who are seeking an escape from the real world.
But nobody here was interviewed properly, none of the guests. We've heard from taxi drivers, from locals, and confirmed from the hotel manager that a lot of people wanted out of here.
And the most extraordinary admission which we've got, and we now understand this to be true, from a key source, is that the hotel manager, a man who gave CPR to Michaela, he said there was hardly a part of her body he didn't touch as he was trying to
save her, you know.
He himself was not DNA tested until
2012. As well as Brice Leno, the first responders, the policemen and the ambulance staff were not DNA tested until recently. Tracy Alexander, a specialist DNA consultant, outlines the way it should have been done.
Preservation of the scene is the most important bit, so you want your cordons there, you want to control access in and out. So You can't, for example, if it's a body in a hotel room, you can't just close off the lifts and close the car parks. People might need to get out. There could be a fire. You've got to, make sure there's a certain amount of safety to it. But as far as you can restrict and then measure who's in there and who's out of there so that you can go back to those people and sample them for any of your major evidence types to exclude them as part of the potential contamination that might have occurred at the scene.
What happened? Why did the DNA sampling not deliver the results we expected?
They didn't seem to collect the DNA properly at all. The motive for her killing was clearly a robbery, and yet there was obvious items like a wallet and an expensive mobile phone that had been left in the room at the time, and they weren't even swabbed for DNA. People in the resort were allowed leave without giving their DNA, and they just didn't collect it properly.
But despite the critical failures first time round, Tracy Alexander believes that all is not lost.
There is no case that we would never look at. There is always something to look at. All you need is just the small amount of source material that you can really get some wonderful successes.
Our cold case investigators have already revealed just how difficult it's going to be for the new police team to try and repair the damage from the first flawed and failed investigation. But are the new murder squad up to the job?
If it's the same police force which are looking again at this particular case, then how do you stop them having the mindset that they first had? It's very difficult. The only hope, therefore, is that there has been enough international and external pressure to ensure that enough people in the Mauritian criminal justice system ensure that this police investigation is appropriately investigated.
Under international pressure, the Mauritian police force have drafted in cold case expertise from the UK and Northern Ireland, and they've also engaged an accredited French forensic laboratory, providing new impetus to the investigation. One of the fresh possibilities being considered is the exhumation of Michaela's body in the pursuit of extra DNA evidence.
Unnecessary distress is not the purpose of a forensic laboratory or a police service. It's just the last thing that anybody would want. However, taking into account the fact that potentially you could give resolution to a family by conducting an exhumation, provided you've taken all of those factors into account and everybody's agreeable to progressing in that way, there is huge potential to be gained, because the technology we use is such that until you look, you don't know what's there. And provided people are willing to give their permission for you to progress, it's always worth a try.
Coming up, we hunt down the new chief suspect in the case and reveal a dramatic new piece of evidence linking him to the murder. Michaela McAreavey was murdered just days into her honeymoon, brutally strangled by a stranger in a luxurious resort on the paradise island of Mauritius. Buried in her wedding dress just weeks after her marriage, her killer still remains at large. I've brought a cold case team across the world to try and discover how and why Michaela McAreavey was murdered on January 10th, 2011. 2 suspects have already been acquitted amid allegations of police brutality and coercion. Despite these failings, the Mauritian force still claim that they've solved all the murders on the island in recent years, apart, that is, from Michaela's.
No police force in any criminal justice system that I'm aware of has a 100% success rate. And any police force that claims that, immediately for me, the alarm bells start to ring in terms of people being fitted up, about, rumour, rather than evidence being the criteria on which suspects will be arrested and evidence placed before juries.
Police actions have been under scrutiny from the start, when photographs from the crime scene were handed to one Mauritian paper which published the naked and bruised corpse of Michaela, causing desperate distress to her family and friends. The police also lost the CCTV footage, bungled DNA collection, and are now being sued by the innocent trial suspects. The evidence now conclusively points to a theft gone wrong. It's now clear that the killer was caught in an act of thievery, panicked, and then murdered Michaela as he attempted to escape the honeymoon suite. We don't know who strangled her, but we've a good idea why.
The broader context is poverty, the circumstances in which this perpetrator undoubtedly lived. Because you've got to remember that Mauritius is a developing country, and, you know, there will be people working there for incomes that are well below the incomes they would earn in Ireland or in England. And therefore the idea that not only are you panicking because you've been caught in someone's room when you shouldn't be, the threat for you is that you're going to lose your job. And that job might be supporting not just yourself and your immediate family, it might also be supporting your extended family.
Fight or flight, that was the choice facing the killer, according to former police officer and hotel security expert Roger Blake.
Thieves are under stress in two very clear-cut situations: when they're attempting to enter a premises and when they leave a premises. Those are the two times usually that they will be caught, and those are the two times that their stress levels build up. So having got into the room, they're relatively safe. They can take their time, they can look around, they can steal things, but suddenly there they are with stuff on them. And then they come to leave. And that's the time that they could be discovered. They walk out of a room, or at that point they walk out and they meet the person coming in, and they're carrying something in their hands that belongs to the other person. They're caught. They're banged to rights as such. People react in different ways. People will try to lie. If they haven't got the intelligence to come out with a coherent sentence, then they may resort to violence.
The case has been a disaster from the start, but one suspect looms large, someone who is picked up almost immediately by the Mauritian police. He is proving to be the central figure in the new investigation of the case, and we set about tracking him down to ask him if he was involved in Michaela's murder. This new chief suspect is Dasan Narienen, a former security guard at the hotel who was working on the day of the murder. His whereabouts around the time of Michaela's death cannot be verified, and his fingerprints were found on the counterfeit keycard that replaced the stolen master keycard in the security hut. That stolen keycard was the one used to enter Michaela's room just minutes before she was murdered. Narienen's DNA was also found on the door of the safe in the murder room, something for which he is yet to fully account for. Narienen denies being involved in the murder and says the only time he was in the room was to respond to help when the body was found. After a 24-hour search that brought us from casinos in Port Louis to a rundown shack near Terre Rouge in northern Mauritius, we found Narienen apparently unwell, we were told. This was due to the stress he was under because of the case. Narienen was the family's main breadwinner, and now that he's lost his job at the hotel, his family are struggling in poverty. We wanted to know what he remembers about the day of the murder and what he did when he went to the room to assist John McAreavey. Although he can understand English, he chose to speak through an interpreter.
In the hotel, the CCTV footage sees you have gone missing for half an hour, which is the time that, within the time that Michaela was murdered.
Caméra le film de ça. Derrière temps, avant Michaela mort.
Dasan said he was patrolling the area around the Banyan restaurant when Michaela was killed.
He said he was walking around the perimeter, but he's not on CCTV.
No, he was during this time. He said he was working at a Banyan restaurant.
Yeah.
And there is no CCTV.
Okay, but it is the first time he was asked that, he said he was around the perimeter.
Yes, because he was in patrol.
Okay. And can you give us an explanation as to why his DNA was found on the door that opens to the safe in the room?
No, it was not in the cough, but in the cupboard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, why was his DNA found there?
So he has got to take the towels from the cupboard, then he just put his hand to give a support for his body to let him to take the towel.
The towels aren't in the cupboard.
Oh, he was hanging in the ring near the cupboard.
They were hanging on the ring, but where the towels are is nowhere near the cupboard in the room.
We challenged him because there are no towels in the cupboard where the safe is.
Okay, but where the ring is, where the towels are kept in the room, is nowhere near the cupboard with the safe in it.
So
It's too far away.
Oui, parce que déjà comme elle coûte une assurance, coûte ring là été, avec coûte normal là été, why normal là you
No, but
he said he was not so far, but he meant just to have a support for
It's about 2 meters.
the meeting.
He's insisting that that's why he's getting attacked.
And then he just yes, more than 2 meters like this.
So what is his version of events then, of what actually, of the day? He heard the shouts, the calls for help from the room, and
Oui, nous avons tout été comme sur John qui yes, he was on the road, asphalted road. The way to go to the swimming pool, he was there. And then he heard John crying for help, and then he ran to the room.
And where was John and where was Michaela?
So first when he entered, he saw John round back eye, and he was giving the first massage, first help. And then John told him go and pick the towel. So he was picking the towel, and then he phoned the control in the room. From the room, so he used the phone from the room, and then he phoned reception, and everybody came.
Okay.
But had he anything to do with the murder?
Not again.
No, nothing.
But Dasan dramatically revealed something he's not told anybody so far. Incredibly, he admits that he touched Michaela's body and that his DNA may be on her corpse.
At the moment, the new investigation, he is the police's #1 suspect. We've been told this. Can you just ask him now for me, is there any possibility that his DNA could be on Michaela's body?
Yes. He said me, he has not just touched her by his cheek, by her cheeks, that's all.
He touched her face?
That's the cheeks.
So his DNA will be on her body?
Maybe, maybe.
Okay.
This new testimony represents a significant change in his position, and we've passed on this new evidence to the Mauritian Police's new murder squad for their consideration. Dasan Narayanan has been a central figure in this case for more than 2.5 years and looks likely to remain one for some time. He has declared his innocence, but whoever is the guilty party, how will they feel about the continuing pursuit of the killer?
What we're dealing with in this situation now is a chief suspect who will be feeling incredibly vulnerable and clutching at straws to justify what he already knows are the weaknesses in any alibi that he can construct to explain away why his DNA might be in the room, why there might be some other types of evidence to tie him to that particular crime scene.
Our information is now that there is a file with the Director of Public Prosecutions in relation to Narayanan, and that he is likely to have a case to answer in the future.
Meanwhile, back in Michaela's hometown, her community and family are still coming to terms with the terrible tragedy of the bride who was buried in her wedding dress just weeks after she wore it up the aisle.
Yes, the grieving goes on, the concern for the family goes on. I'm sure every day is difficult for the family, and I'm sure each day they think of that beautiful girl with that beautiful radiant smile that meant so much to so many people.
Now, 2.5 years on from the murder, we know there are no answers. There is no closure, and there are no convictions. Earlier this year, the family grieved and shed a tear at the 2nd anniversary of her terrible murder. The question is, how many more anniversaries will pass before we really find out what happened to Michaela on that terrible day?